Pretty soon, we'll be seeing jack-o'-lanterns, king-sized candy bars, and deep-cut costumes. But today, we're talking football on the 3304 Sports Kickoff in the beautiful Mossart Center studio. I'm Riley Klaus, joined alongside Pierce McKnight and Tucker Terry. And before we dive into what's up next, it was an eventful game against Miami last week. There's a lot to take away, and I'm sure the ending is bound to be discussed.
Yeah, obviously the game ended on a controversial note. My take is the same as Brent Pry's. I didn't see enough to overturn that call. For me, it's one thing if they called it incomplete on the field. Look, we all go to Tech, but we can't be mad if they don't overturn that. But the fact that it was called complete and they thought they saw inconclusive evidence, I didn't really see it. But what was encouraging, the Hokies looked like the team we thought they were going to be, and Kyron Drones looked really good for the first time in a couple weeks.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if Kyron Drones plays his cousin every week, I think Virginia Tech will be in the playoffs. I mean, he looked great, right? But, I mean, yeah, but like you said, that call, if it's not called a touchdown on the field, there's no way that's a touchdown. Like, that's not a touchdown in 99% of the plays, but they called it on the field. If you take 5 to 10 minutes to overturn a call, I do not believe that you can overturn it.
Well, losing in heartbreaking fashion is very difficult. What kind of response do you think we'll see based on losing in that way?
Well, I think there's two possibilities. One, the Hokies have flipped the switch, they've figured it out, and they're the team that we thought they were entering the season. Or two, they play up to better teams and play down to inferior teams. I think this week they have a chip on their shoulder to prove that the team we saw on Friday is the real team that we're going to see for the rest of the season.
For sure. I mean, they almost flipped the switch completely, but they were just short. But this is their first time in Cali, I think, in a long time. I mean, we haven't played Stanford since the Orange Bowl a couple of years ago. So I think the atmosphere, I mean, the travel might be a little impactful, but I think Virginia Tech can definitely show the world that they can flip the switch completely and that they can go on a run.
Well, despite the devastating loss, the Hokies have had flashes of potential and have to look ahead or they will be lost in the past for the rest of the season. You don't face your fears, you ride them, Tyler Owens once said. To break down Virginia Tech's confidence level going into the weekend, let's send it to our very own Landon Weaver.
Thanks, Riley. Tomorrow, Virginia Tech will travel to Palo Alto, California to take on Stanford for their second ACC matchup of the season. And yes, you heard that right. The Hokies are going to go to the West Coast for an Atlantic Coast Conference game. It's a crazy world we're living in here. Now, this is a new geography lesson for the Hokies, but the question remains the same. Can Virginia Tech pick up a dub when facing a decent opponent? They were very close to doing that last Friday against Miami in a contest that will be talked about for years to come. And I think it's safe to say that there's indisputable evidence that the Hokies will be playing with a different kind of desire to win. Now, even though the Maroon and Orange are 2-3, there is still plenty to be happy about, especially if you watch the heavyweight fight that went down in Miami Gardens. Tootin continued his stellar play, chugging along for 141 yards, including a 55-yard house call in the second quarter. Before the season began, he made it clear that he wanted to get back to that 1,000-yard threshold that he hit at North Carolina A&T. And he's well on his way, with 532 yards through just 5 games. But Tootin wasn't the only piece of the Hokies puzzle that kept them in the game. Drones played with a newfound confidence, buying time and creating space when flushed out of the pocket, while looking relaxed inside as well. He threw for 2 touchdowns and connected with 6 different receivers during the ballgame. On the other side of the ball, the lunch pail defense was in full effect. They forced 2 interceptions and a fumble from Cam Ward, while also being able to get through the Canes' stifling pass block for 3 sacks on the Heisman frontrunner. Now, Mansour Delane led the D with 7 tackles, and APR continued to impose fear in the eyes of any quarterback he's come across as he picked up yet another sack. So, what's the moral of the story? This was the first well-balanced game the Hokies have played all season. To be saying that after facing a top-ranked Miami team is a very positive sign. And if Virginia Tech can keep chopping wood on both sides of the ball, then it won't take long for the Cardinal tree to collapse on Saturday. Guys?
Thanks, Landon. Now, traveling all across the country is something that all ACC teams are going to see over the next while, but Virginia Tech is really in the heart of it, having to go from Florida to California in back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be a flight for sure. I personally, when I travel, I usually need a 24-hour reset. I think that them leaving on Thursday and them playing at 12:30 local time on Saturday, I think that'll be good enough for them. I think that this Virginia Tech squad, as long as they keep the gas on the pedal, they'll be fine. Baseball Tootin showed the airplane. I mean, he seemed comfortable. He had his portable PlayStation 5. I think they'll be good this weekend. I don't think travel will be too much of an impact.
Yeah, I agree. Brent Pry and the staff did really all they can to make this feel as normal as possible in a really unusual situation. Like you said, they took off on Thursday. They invested in a bigger, more comfortable plane. And apparently they got a good night of sleep, and they're having walkthroughs this Friday morning, so they should be ready to go come tomorrow.
Well, maybe they'll be playing College Football 25 on that PlayStation you mentioned. But Stanford may be new to the ACC family, but they don't appear to be sitting at the kids' table. Does this tree have a gold star in quarterback Ashton Daniels, or is the crown left waiting another year for someone special? Here's Miles Jordan with more on the Stanford Cardinal.
Thanks, Riley. The Stanford Cardinal will make history on Saturday, October 5th, when they play host to the Virginia Tech Hokies, and two ACC teams will face off in California for the first time in in-conference history. The Cardinal have had a similar season to the Hokies this year after dropping their first game 34-27 against TCU, bouncing back and winning 2 straight against Cal Poly and Syracuse, and then falling short to number 15 Clemson in Week 5, evening them out to a record of 2-2 entering Week 6. However, due to their win over Syracuse, the Cardinals sit atop the Hokies in ACC play, putting them right in the middle of the pack. The success that Stanford has seen this season is due to their quarterback, Ashton Daniels, who you would think is majoring in theater by the one-man show that he's been putting on all season long. Daniels leads the Cardinals in touchdowns with 5, rushing yards with 250, and carried Stanford down the field on an 11-play, 54-yard game-winning drive against Syracuse, which was topped off by a 39-yard field goal by kicker Emmett Keeney, giving them their first in-conference win in ACC history. But while Daniels has been the catalyst for giving the Cardinals scoring opportunities, he has also severely struggled to hold on to the ball this season. In 2023, he threw for just 8 interceptions through 12 games, unlike this season where he has already thrown for just 6 picks in 4 games, throwing more interceptions than touchdowns. His struggle to protect the football was evident in Stanford's Week 5 40-15 loss against number 15 Clemson, where Daniels completed just 9 of his 19 attempts for 71 yards and threw for 3 interceptions. This set a record for the fewest yards he's thrown as a starter in his collegiate career and tied the most interceptions he's thrown in a game with 3, before leaving the game with a lower body injury. While Daniels is questionable for this week's matchup against the Hokies, Stanford head coach Troy Taylor addressed Daniels' injury, stating that he may be ready to play on Saturday, depending on how his injury improves in this week's practice. Taylor also spoke about his confidence in Cardinal backup quarterback Justin Lamson, who threw for 58 yards and a touchdown against Clemson in his limited minutes. This is ominous when the Cardinals are facing the defensive Tech, who held number 7 Miami to just 38 points in Week 4, their fewest all season, and picked off Heisman hopeful Cam Ward twice, as well as forced Ward to fumble on the opening drive of the game. Not only does Stanford have to worry about Tech's secondary, who produced 4 picks on the season, but also their powerful defensive line, who has recorded 16 sacks through 5 games, which looks dangerous against Daniels, who has already been sacked 7 times through 4 games. Lamson was also sacked 3 times by the Tigers in Week 5, proving that the Cardinals' O-line struggles to protect their quarterback no matter who is in the backfield. The Cardinals need to hold on to the football and take care of their quarterback on Saturday afternoon when they play the Maroon and Orange. And if they do, they have a chance to capture their first in-conference ACC win at home in school history. Back to you guys.
Great stuff, Miles. Now that we've heard a bit about both sides, what do you think the biggest X factor is going to be for either team on Saturday?
For me, the biggest X factor is the health of Stanford's quarterback, Ashton Daniels. He's still questionable after a lower body injury last week, and he's actually the Cardinal leading rusher. His passing hasn't been great this year, like Miles mentioned, more picks than touchdowns, But as we know, running quarterbacks have really killed the Hokies over recent years. Just think about Diego Pavia, who earned the nickname Mexican Manziel, the way he torched the Hokies on the ground. The Hokies have to figure out how to stop that read option, and that will only be a huge issue if Daniels is playing.
For sure. And I think if Virginia Tech goes into the mindset of let's contain the QB and let's stop the run, that's exactly what they did against Rutgers, and when they threw the ball all over Virginia Tech. I mean, these DBs, they're good, but they got to stay consistent. They did a decent job last week, and we contained Cam Ward as much as we could. I mean, that's a Heisman candidate. He's great on the field. But I think if Virginia Tech can limit the pass game, but also remember that they is an RPO team, I think they're golden. And then if Stanford, if they can trick the Hokie defense enough and they can get some passing yards with their 2 great wide receivers, I think Stanford can take this game quite easily.
Well, Stanford's a somewhat fresh opponent, but there will be some new recurring opponents for the Hokies over the next few seasons. But Virginia Tech is no stranger to seeing a wild card in their hand. To look at the oddest foes in Virginia Tech football's history, let's toss it to Thomas Howlett.
With Saturday marking only the second ever meeting between Virginia Tech and Stanford, I thought it would be interesting to take a trip back in time to look at some of the more unique opponents in Virginia Tech football history. To start this journey, we will go back to the beginning of the 20th century on an October day in 1903. On this day, Virginia Tech would end up winning a 29-0 game against St. Albans Lutheran Boys School. Now, I bet you never heard of this school before, and for good reason. That is because it closed its doors in 1911. However, 5 years later, in 1916, the building would reopen, this time as St. Albans Sanatorium. Crazy, isn't it? Nowadays, St. Albans is a haunted attraction, conducting tours and even hosting a haunted house. 2 years after this matchup, Tech would face Gallaudet University, which is a school for the deaf and hard of hearing, and they would win this matchup 56-0. While Gallaudet is now a Division III football team, it is most famous for being the birthplace of the huddle, one of the most important developments ever in the game of football. In that same year, the Hokies defeated the small Cumberland College 12-0. Yes, the exact same Cumberland College that 11 years later would lose the most lopsided game in college football history to John Heisman's Georgia Tech 222-0. Surprisingly, Virginia Tech would face another team that was involved in a 200-point game. That team was King University, and in 1922 they defeated Lenoir-Rhyne 206-0. The Hokies would play them in 1922, 1928, and 1931, winning all three matchups. Now, over the course of Virginia Tech's history, they would face three military teams. Now, military teams were not school affiliates. Rather, they were teams created on military bases so that soldiers could compete in sports. In 1918, they played Camp Humphreys, a base located in Fairfax, Virginia. In 1923, they played the 3rd Army Corps, which was once coached by future General and President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And in 1949 and 1950, they played the Quantico Marines, which has a long football history lasting from 1919 to 1972. Tech would go 1-3 against their military foes, only defeating Camp Humphreys. Now, while there are many more small schools with interesting stories and intricate places in history that Virginia Tech has played, these schools and teams deserve a closer look as we appreciate the beautiful history of college football and how every Saturday we may be a part of its legacy.
Fantastic as always, Thomas. Before we head out, it's time for one last segment. Today, we're playing Buy It or Deny It. I will give our panelists a series of statements, which Tucker and Pierce will respond with buy it if they believe it will happen, or deny it if they think it's more likely Jurassic Park opens up next spring. Let's start with this. There is a Mountain West man who is on a mission. Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty wins the Heisman Trophy. Buy it or deny it?
Honestly, I think he's a great player. I think he can definitely win it, but only 13 non-Power 5 players have been in the top 5 of the Heisman voting since 1992, right? So I think we're going to change football this year. I think they definitely take it. So I'm going to buy it. Travis Hunter's going to be close, but I think we'll buy it and we'll go to the Mountain West man from Boise State.
I'm all in on this. I'm going to completely buy it for Ashton Jeanty. He's on pace to break the Mountain West rushing all-time single-season yards by over 200 yards. I don't care that he's not in the Power 4 conference. This is a team that's beaten Oregon. They have a decent chance to get into the college football playoffs. I think he's the best player in the country at any position.
So we have some Ashton Jeanty truthers here. Last week, we had a great matchup between Alabama and Georgia. Might go down as the best game of the regular season. Let's say this. Alabama and Georgia will have a rematch this season.
I don't think they will. And that's because I think Texas and Alabama are going to meet in the SEC championship game. And then I just don't see Alabama and Georgia meeting in the college football playoffs. I think they'll both be in it, but probably at opposite sides of the bracket. And I don't know if they'll meet in, say, the national championship game.
Honestly, I'm going to deny it. I think there's a better chance of seeing the clash for the UT phrase more than I see Alabama and Georgia in the SEC championship. I mean, there's a true possibility that it comes in the top 12 of the championship playoff run. I think that's a good possibility, but I'm going to deny it because I don't see them in the SEC championship, and I can't predict the 12-team playoff yet.
Well, let's flip to the ACC. Miami just had a scare from Virginia Tech, but still going to make this statement. Miami wins the ACC championship this season.
I think it's a good possibility. I think they definitely make the ACC championship. I don't know if they can beat Clemson. Clemson's a sleeper team. Clemson has only lost to Georgia. Their schedule is not that hard. I think this Clemson team can definitely show that they have some history with this team, and they can definitely win the ACC.
I'm going to buy it, but hesitantly. For the same reasons that Pierce was just mentioning, I think Clemson's legit. They've really figured some things out after that Week 1 loss to Georgia. And actually, the best case scenario for the ACC is Miami goes undefeated and loses to Clemson in the ACC championship, because then the ACC would probably get 2 teams in the playoffs, which is exactly what they want.
And so you bring up numbers about the playoffs. Let's talk the SEC. 5 SEC teams will make the college football playoff. Buy it or deny it?
I deny it. I think there are 5 SEC teams that are top 12 teams in the country. I don't think they all make the college football playoffs. And that's simply because they have to face each other. That's the issue. You got Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss just outside. All these teams have to face each other, so you're going to look at some really good teams like a Tennessee that could end the year with 2 losses, 3 losses, and they're not all going to get in.
Yeah, no, not a chance. I'm denying it wholeheartedly. I think I see 1 non-Power 4 conference team. I see 2 Big 12, 2 ACC, and 3 to 4 Big 10 and the SEC schools. Don't sleep on this Indiana team. I mean, they got Oregon, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio State that's all going to contend for the Big 10. And then you got the powerhouse of the SEC. I just don't see them going 5 or 6 teams to make the playoff. I just can't. I can't buy it. I can't buy it.
So the consensus is don't put all the chips on that end of the table. But that'll do it for this week's 3304 Kickoff. Thank you to our reporters, Landon Weaver, Miles Jordan, and Thomas Howlett, as well as our entire production crew behind the scenes. Saying so long for Pierce McKnight and Tucker Terry, I'm Riley Klaus. We'll see you next Friday for another edition of the 3304 Sports Kickoff.